The wind carried dust across the open plains, whispering through the tall grass as the wagon creaked forward. Eliza Carter sat stiffly on the wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The journey west had never felt like an adventure. To her, only a necessity. After losing both her parents, she had no choice but to follow distant relatives she barely knew. Chasing a promise of stability that always seemed just out of reach, the land stretched endlessly in every direction, beautiful in a lonely, unforgiving way. The sky was vast and cloudless, pressing down on her like a silent weight. Around her, the wagon train moved slowly, each traveler wrapped in their own worries. Some spoke in hopeful tones about new beginnings, but Eliza couldn't share their excitement. To her, it felt like leaving behind the last pieces of a life she understood. That morning had begun like any other, quiet, tense, and uncertain. But by midday, everything changed. The wagons had become scattered after a wrong turn near a narrow ridge. Voices rose in confusion and directions clashed as people argued over which path to follow. Eliza remembered the unease settling in her chest, the way the air itself seemed to shift. Then, in the chaos, she was separated. It happened so quickly she barely had time to think. One moment, she was climbing down to gather water near a shallow stream. The next, she realized the wagons were gone, completely gone. Panic surged through her as she spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The silence that followed was worse than the confusion, heavy, absolute, and suffocating. "Eliza," she called out, her voice trembling as it echoed into nothingness. No answer came. She wandered for what felt like hours, her steps uneven, her thoughts racing. Every direction looked the same. The land that once seemed merely vast now felt endless and consuming. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as fear took hold, tightening its grip with every passing minute. By the time the sun began to dip lower in the sky, exhaustion had replaced panic. Her legs ached, her throat burned, and her hope was slipping away. That's when she saw him. He stood at a distance, partially hidden by the tall grass, still, silent, watching. Eliza froze. Her breath caught as her eyes locked onto his figure. He didn't move closer, didn't raise a hand or call out. He simply stood there, as though waiting for something. His presence was calm, yet unfamiliar enough to send a ripple of fear through her already fragile state. Every warning she had ever heard echoed in her mind, urging her to run, to hide, to do anything but stay. But her body refused to cooperate. She was too tired, too overwhelmed to move. Slowly, cautiously, the man stepped forward. Eliza's pulse quickened, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. She watched every movement, searching for any sign of danger. But there was none, only a quiet steadiness in the way he carried himself. His expression was unreadable, his eyes focused yet distant, as if measuring the situation rather than reacting to it. He stopped several feet away, leaving space between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Eliza realized then how alone she truly was. The wagons were gone. The people she had relied on were nowhere to be found. And now, standing before her, was someone completely outside her world, someone she didn't understand. Yet, strangely, he made no move to harm her. Instead, he reached down slowly and placed a small water skin on the ground between them. Then he stepped back again. The gesture caught her off guard. Eliza hesitated, her instincts clashing with her need for survival. Her throat burned with thirst, and her body screamed for relief. But trust did not come easily. Not here, not now. Still, the man said nothing. He simply waited. Minutes seemed to stretch endlessly before Eliza finally took a cautious step forward. Her eyes never left him as she knelt and picked up the water skin. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it and took a small sip. Relief washed over her almost instantly. When she looked back up, he was still there, unchanged, unmoving, patient. In that quiet moment, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but something softer than fear. A fragile awareness that this stranger, whoever he was, had chosen not to take advantage of her vulnerability. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, Eliza understood one thing with sudden clarity: her journey had changed, and whatever came next, she would have to face it with this silent Watchful man by her side. The first night felt the longest. Eliza sat near a small, carefully built fire, its soft glow pushing back the darkness, just enough to make the vast prairie feel less endless. The man she still didn't know his name had led her there without a word, walking ahead at a steady pace while always making sure she could follow. He never rushed her, never reached for her, never gave her a reason to panic beyond what already lived in her thoughts. Still, she kept her distance. He moved with quiet confidence, gathering wood, tending the fire, and setting down a simple bundle. Near her, a folded blanket and a small portion of food. Every action was deliberate, calm, and strangely respectful, as though he understood her fear and chose not to add to it. Eliza watched him closely. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, her voice barely steady. He paused for a moment, his back turned to her before glancing over his shoulder. His expression didn't change, but there was something thoughtful in his eyes. After a brief silence, he answered in a low, measured voice, "You are alone." That was all. No explanation. No demand, just a simple truth. Eliza frowned slightly, unsettled by how easily he said it, like it was reason enough. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, her gaze flickering between him and the open land. Beyond, every instinct told her to stay alert, to remain cautious. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and despite everything, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Sleep came slowly. When morning arrived, the world looked different. The golden light of dawn stretched across the plains, painting the grass in soft hues of amber and gold. For a moment, Eliza almost forgot where she was. But then she saw him again, standing a short distance away, watching the horizon. He hadn't left. That realization stirred something complicated inside her. "You stayed," she said, rising to her feet. He turned slightly, giving a small nod. "You needed direction?" Eliza hesitated. "And now?" He studied her for a brief moment before speaking. "Now you decide." His words caught her off guard. "Decide?" She glanced out at the endless stretch of land, her chest tightening. The truth was painfully clear. She had no idea where to go. Every path looked the same. Every direction felt uncertain. Without him, she would be wandering blindly again, but trusting him, that felt just as uncertain. "I want to go back," she said, though her voice lacked confidence. "To the wagon train?" He nodded once, as if acknowledging her choice. "Then we walk." That was it. No argument. No questioning her decision. Just acceptance. They began moving soon after. The journey was quiet, but not uncomfortable. He walked slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was still there. When the terrain became uneven, he slowed his pace. When the sun grew too harsh, he guided them toward shade without a word. Eliza couldn't ignore the pattern. He was watching out for her. At one point, she stumbled over a patch of rough ground, catching herself just before falling. He stopped instantly, turning back with a sharp awareness, though he didn't reach for her. Instead, he waited, giving her space to steady herself. "I'm fine," she said quickly, brushing the dust from her dress. He nodded again, then adjusted their path slightly, leading them over smoother terrain. It was such a small thing, but it stayed with her. Hours passed, and though they covered distance, there was no sign of the wagon train. No tracks. No voices, nothing. Doubt began to creep in. "Are we even going the right way?" Eliza asked, her frustration slipping through. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the land, his gaze thoughtful. "The land changes," he said finally. "Wind hides paths." Eliza sighed softly, running a hand through her hair. "So we're just guessing." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "I am learning." That answer surprised her. "Not, I know." "Not, I'm sure, but I am learning." It was honest. Unexpectedly so. For the first time, Eliza realized something important. He wasn't pretending to have all the answers. He wasn't controlling the situation. He was simply doing his best. Just like she was. As the day wore on, her fear began to shift. Not gone, but softened. She started noticing things she hadn't before. The way he paused to listen to the wind. The way he observed the ground, reading signs she couldn't see. The quiet patience in everything he did. He wasn't just guiding her, he was protecting her. in a way that didn't feel forced or possessive. That evening, as they stopped to rest again, Eliza found herself speaking without thinking. "What's your name?" He looked at her across the fire, the flickering light reflecting in his eyes. "Dakota," he said. She repeated it softly, unfamiliar, but steady on her tongue. "Dakota?" A small silence followed, but this time it didn't feel heavy. For the first time since she had been separated from her world, Eliza felt something unexpected take root beneath her fear, not trust. Not yet, but the quiet beginning of understanding. By the third morning, Eliza had made her decision. She woke before the sun, the sky still painted in deep shades of blue and gray. The fire had long since faded into quiet embers, and the world around her felt suspended, still, waiting. For a moment, she simply sat there, listening to the soft whisper of the wind moving through the grass. Dakota was asleep a short distance away. Even in rest, he seemed aware of his surroundings, his posture steady, his presence grounded. Over the past 2 days, he had given her no reason to fear him. No harsh words. No controlling actions. Only quiet guidance and an unspoken promise of safety. And yet, she couldn't stay. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her thoughts restless. Every instinct from the life she once knew pushed her toward one conclusion. This isn't where you belong. No matter how calm he seemed, no matter how different he was from the stories she had grown up hearing, he was still a stranger. And this land, this vast, unfamiliar wilderness, was not her home. She needed to find her way back. Carefully, she stood. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though even the air might betray her. She glanced once more at Dakota. He hadn't stirred. A flicker of hesitation passed through her chest. For a brief moment, doubt crept in quiet, unwelcome. He had helped her. He had protected her. He had never once tried to keep her from leaving. But that didn't change what she felt inside, the pull toward something familiar, something certain. She couldn't ignore it. Taking a steady breath, Eliza turned and began to walk. At first, her steps were cautious, almost tentative. But as distance grew between them, her pace quickened. The rising light of dawn stretched across the land, revealing the endless horizon ahead. It was both beautiful and intimidating, a reminder of how small she was within it. Still, she pressed on. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, its warmth slowly turning into an unrelenting heat. Eliza followed what she believed to be a natural path, keeping the position of the sun in mind, trying to retrace what she thought might lead her back to the wagon trail. But the land didn't offer clear answers. Every hill looked like the last. Every stretch of grass blurred into the next. The more she walked, the less certain she became. Doubt began to creep in, quiet at first, then louder with each passing hour. She stopped near a cluster of rocks, her breathing uneven. "This is right," she whispered to herself, though her voice lacked conviction. "It has to be." But deep down, she knew the truth. She was guessing. The confidence she had felt that morning began to fade, replaced by a growing unease. The silence around her no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty. Too empty. She missed something. It took her a moment to realize what it was. The quiet presence behind her. Dakota had never spoken much, but he had filled the silence in a way she hadn't noticed until now. His steady movements, his watchful awareness, it had grounded her, even when she didn't want to admit it. Now, she was truly alone. The realization sent a chill through her, despite the heat of the day. She kept walking. By midday, exhaustion began to take hold. Her steps slowed, her legs growing heavier with each passing mile. The small amount of water she carried was nearly gone, and the sun offered no mercy. She stumbled once, catching herself just before falling. A frustrated breath escaped her lips as she wiped the sweat from her brow. "I can do this," she muttered. "I have to." But the land didn't respond. It remained vast, indifferent, unchanged. As the hours stretched on, Eliza began to notice something else. She wasn't finding any signs of the wagon train. No tracks, no broken ground. No distant movement, nothing. The absence was deafening. By the time the sun began to lower in the sky, Painting the world in warm shades of gold and orange, Eliza's determination had worn thin. Each step now felt heavier than the last, her body pushing against limits she wasn't prepared for. Finally, she stopped. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she turned in a slow circle, taking in the endless expanse around her. There was no direction, no clear path, no sign that she was getting any closer to where she wanted to be. For the first time since she had left, fear returned, not sharp and sudden like before, but deep and steady. She was lost. Completely. Eliza sank down onto the ground, her strength slipping away as the reality settled in. The horizon stretched out in every direction, offering no answers, no comfort, only silence. And in that silence, one thought began to rise above the rest, not panic, not regret, but something far more complicated. She thought of Dakota, not as the stranger she had feared, but as the one person who had known how to survive here, the one person who had understood the land, who had guided her without expectation, the one person she had walked away from. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of her choice pressing heavily against her chest. She had wanted freedom. But now, for the first time, she began to wonder if she had just walked away from the only place she had truly been safe. The night came quietly, but it didn't bring rest. Eliza sat curled against the base of a weathered rock, her knees drawn close to her chest as the last light of the sun faded beyond the horizon. The warmth of the day disappeared quickly, replaced by a cool stillness that seemed to settle deep into her bones. The prairie, so wide and open under the sun now, felt endless, in a different way shadowed, uncertain, and far too silent. She hadn't moved much since she stopped walking. There was nowhere to go. For the first time since leaving that morning, Eliza allowed herself to stop pretending she knew what she was doing. The fragile confidence she had carried with her was gone, worn down by hours of wandering without direction. All that remained was the truth she could no longer ignore. She was lost. Completely and undeniably lost. A shaky breath escaped her as she rested her head back against the stone, her eyes lifting to the darkening sky. Stars began to appear one by one, faint at first, then brighter as the world around her dimmed. It should have been beautiful, and part of her recognized that it was, but the beauty felt distant, overshadowed by the weight pressing on her chest. "I thought I could do this," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. The words lingered in the air before fading into nothing. Her mind replayed the day over and over again, the moment she had chosen to leave, the steady pace she had set, the certainty she had clung to. It all felt so different now, as though it belonged to someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone braver, someone who hadn't underestimated the land. Eliza tightened her arms around herself, trying to hold on to what little warmth remained. Her thoughts shifted, slowly at first, then with growing clarity. Dakota, his name surfaced gently, but it didn't leave. She could picture him so clearly, the way he moved, calm and unhurried, the way he listened before acting, the quiet patience in his presence. At the time, she had seen it as distance, as something to be wary of. Now, sitting alone in the vastness of the prairie, she saw it differently. It wasn't distance, it was understanding. He had known how to survive here. Not through force or control, but through awareness, through respect for the land and everything within it. He hadn't tried to change it, he had learned from it. And he had tried in his own quiet way to help her do the same. A slow realization settled over her, heavier than anything she had felt before. He had never been her captor, not really. The thought was unsettling, not because it frightened her, but because it challenged everything she had believed from the beginning. She had labeled him based on fear, on stories, on assumptions she had never questioned. But his actions had never matched those fears. He had given her space. He had given her choice. Even when she said she wanted to leave, he hadn't stopped her. He had simply walked with her, until she chose otherwise. Eliza closed her eyes, her breath unsteady as the truth sank deeper. "I didn't understand," she murmured. The words felt small compared to the weight behind them. A gentle breeze moved across the land, brushing against her face, carrying with it the faint scent of dry grass and earth. It reminded her of something steady, something familiar from the past few days. It reminded her of him. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something far more difficult to name. Regret, perhaps. Or something close to it. She had walked away. Not because he had given her reason to, but because she had been too afraid to see clearly. The silence around her deepened, stretching endlessly in every direction. But now, instead of feeling empty, it felt revealing, like the land itself was offering her space to think, to understand. And in that space, a question began to form. What if she had been wrong? Eliza opened her eyes again, staring out into the darkness. The path ahead of her was invisible, uncertain, filled with risks she no longer felt prepared to face alone. But behind her was something she hadn't fully seen until now. Not danger, not control, but quiet safety. A place where she had been watched over without being held. A place where she had been free to choose. Her heart began to beat a little faster, not with panic, but with decision. Slowly, she pushed herself to her feet. The exhaustion was still there, pulling at her limbs, but something else had taken its place, something steadier, more certain. She turned. The direction she had come from looked no different than any other, the darkness hiding any trace of her path. The journey back felt different. Eliza walked beneath the fading stars, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she retraced steps she could no longer clearly see. The land had not changed, still vast, still quiet, but something inside her had. Where uncertainty once guided her forward, now there was intention in every step she took. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but for the first time since she had run, she felt certain about why. The horizon slowly softened. As dawn approached, pale light stretching across the plains. Each step forward carried a quiet hope, fragile but steady. She held on to it, even as doubt tried to creep in again. What if she couldn't find her way back? What if he had left? The thought tightened her chest, but she pushed it aside. Dakota didn't seem like someone who disappeared without reason. If anything, he had always been constant, grounded, present, still. She quickened her pace. By the time the sun began to rise, Eliza's legs ached with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. Her eyes scanned every stretch of land, every familiar curve of rock and grass, searching for something, anything that might lead her back to him. Then she saw it, a faint mark in the earth. Barely visible, but different enough to catch her attention. She knelt down, brushing her fingers lightly across the ground. It wasn't much, a slight disturbance, a subtle shift in the soil, but it stirred something in her memory, a place they had passed before. Her heart lifted. She stood quickly, turning in a slow circle, letting her instincts guide her. The land no longer felt like a stranger. It felt like a puzzle she was beginning to understand, and she followed it. Hours passed. At this time, the exhaustion didn't feel as heavy. Each step carried purpose, each breath filled with a growing sense of anticipation. The fear that had once surrounded her was quieter now, replaced by something warmer, something steadier. Hope. When she finally saw the small rise in the land, the one where they had camped before, her breath caught. She slowed, her steps suddenly uncertain again. What if she was wrong? What if she had misunderstood everything? But as she reached the top of the rise, those thoughts faded instantly. He was there. Dakota stood near the remnants of a fire, his posture calm, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though he had been watching for something. For a long moment, Eliza simply stared at him, her chest rising and falling with quiet disbelief. He hadn't left. A wave of relief washed over her, so strong it nearly made her knees give way. She took a step forward. The sound must have reached him, because he turned. Their eyes met across the distance. There was no shock in his expression, no anger, no question. Only recognition. As if he had been expecting her. Eliza hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. All the thoughts she had carried with her, all the explanations she had rehearsed, they disappeared the moment she stood before him again. She started, her voice faltering. She swallowed, steadying herself. I got lost. The words felt small, inadequate compared to everything she had realized. Dakota watched her for a moment, his expression unchanged. Then he gave a slight nod, yes. He said simply, no judgment, no accusation, just quiet understanding. Elisa blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. She had expected something more, questions, perhaps, or even disappointment. But there was none of that here. He stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the fire. You are tired, he added. That was all. The invitation wasn't forceful. It wasn't even spoken like a command. It was just there, open, patient. Eliza felt something shift inside her again, something softer than before, something steadier. She walked toward the fire, her movements slower now, more thoughtful. As she sat down, she noticed the small details she had overlooked before, the way the fire had been carefully prepared, the extra water set aside, the quiet readiness of everything around her. He had been waiting, not chasing, not searching, just waiting. Why? She asked quietly, looking up at him. Why didn't you come after me? Dakota met her gaze, his answer coming without hesitation. You chose to go. Eliza's breath caught slightly. And now? She asked. He studied her for a brief moment, as if measuring something deeper than her words. Now you chose to return. The weight of that settled gently over her. He hadn't seen her as something to keep. He had seen her as someone free to decide. For the first time, Eliza understood the difference completely. She lowered her gaze, a faint, almost shy smile touching her lips as she wrapped her hands around the warmth of the fire. I didn't understand before, she admitted softly. Dakota didn't respond right away, but he didn't need to. The silence between them felt different now, not empty, not uncertain, but full of something unspoken and growing, something neither of them had named yet, but both had begun to feel. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. There was no formal decision, no spoken agreement that Eliza would stay, but she did. Not out of fear, not out of necessity, but because leaving no longer felt urgent. For the first time since her journey had begun, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, without constantly searching for an escape. Dakota never questioned it. He didn't ask how long she would remain or what she planned to do next. Instead, he continued as he always had, steady, patient, and quietly aware. If her presence changed anything for him, he didn't show it. At first, Eliza found that unsettling. She had grown used to expectations, to people demanding explanations or decisions. But here, there was none of that. Just space. And slowly, she began to fill it. Each morning, she woke to the soft light of dawn stretching across the plains. Dakota was usually already awake, moving silently as he prepared for the day. Sometimes, he would leave for a short while, returning with water or small provisions. Other times, he remained nearby, observing the land in a way that felt almost instinctive. Eliza started watching him more closely, not with suspicion, as she once had, but with curiosity. You always look at the ground, she said one morning, stepping beside him as he paused near a patch of grass. Dakota glanced at her briefly, then back down. The ground tells stories. Eliza tilted her head slightly. Stories? He nodded, crouching down and brushing his fingers lightly over the earth. Who passed? When? How they moved? She tried to see what he saw, but to her, it was just dirt and scattered grass. I don't see anything, she admitted. Dakota looked at her again, his expression calm. You will. It wasn't said as encouragement or reassurance. It was said like a simple truth, and somehow that made her believe it. Over the next few days, he began to show her small things, not through long explanations, but through quiet demonstrations. He would pause and point, letting her observe. Sometimes she understood, sometimes she didn't, but he never rushed her, never made her feel incapable. Learning came slowly, but it came. In return, Eliza found herself sharing pieces of her own world. It started without intention, small comments, passing thoughts. She spoke about the wagon train, about the places she had lived before, about the things she once thought mattered most. Dakota listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't always respond, but he listened in a way that made her feel heard, even when words were few. One afternoon, as they rested beneath the shade of a lone tree, Eliza found herself laughing softly. I used to think I understood everything, she said, shaking her head slightly. Where I was going, what I was supposed to do, all of it. Dakota sat nearby, his gaze steady. And now? He asked. She hesitated, her smile fading into something more thoughtful. Now I'm not so sure. He nodded once as if that answer made perfect sense. The simplicity of it surprised her. There was no judgment in his response. No attempt to fix her uncertainty or guide her toward a specific answer. He accepted it as it was. And that, more than anything, made her feel at ease. As the days passed, their silence began to change. It was no longer something to fill or avoid. It became something shared, comfortable, natural. They didn't need constant conversation to understand each other. A glance, a small gesture, a shift in posture, it was enough. Eliza noticed it one evening as they sat by the fire. The sky above them was clear, filled with stars that stretched endlessly across the darkness. She had seen them before, of course, but now they felt different, closer somehow. More meaningful. Dakota followed her gaze upward. The stars move, he said quietly. Eliza looked at him. They do? He nodded, slowly, but always. She watched them again, her expression thoughtful. I never noticed. You were not looking, he replied. She smiled faintly at that. No, she said softly. I wasn't. A gentle silence followed, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of understanding, of presence, of something growing between them that neither of them had named. Eliza drew her knees closer, resting her arms around them as she looked out into the distance. I used to think I needed to find my way back, she said after a while. Dakota didn't respond immediately. He simply waited. She took a slow breath. But now, I think I needed to get lost first. The words settled between them, quiet but certain. Dakota turned his gaze toward her, studying her in that calm, steady way of his. Then, after a moment, he gave a small nod. Yes. He said. Just one word, but it carried more meaning than anything else. He could have said. Eliza felt it then clearer than before. The distance between them had changed. Not closed completely, but no longer wide, and in its place something new had begun to take shape, not forced, not rushed, but real. The change didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly like everything else had. Eliza didn't wake up one morning suddenly certain of her future. There was no single moment that declared everything had shifted. Instead, it was a series of small realizations, each one building on the last until she could no longer ignore what she felt. She had stopped counting the days. Time moved differently here. Without schedules or expectations, the hours blended together in a way that felt both unfamiliar and freeing. The urgency she once carried, the constant need to go somewhere, to be something, had slowly faded. In its place was something steadier, something that felt like peace. But peace didn't mean clarity. Not yet. That came the day everything changed again. They were walking along a narrow stretch of land when Eliza noticed something unusual in the distance movement. Not the natural sway of grass or the quiet shift of wind, but something deliberate. Her steps slowed. Do you see that? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. Dakota followed her gaze, his expression sharpening slightly. He nodded once. Yes. As they moved closer, the shapes became clearer wagons. Eliza's breath caught in her chest. For a moment, everything else faded. The land, the quiet, the rhythm she had grown used to, it all disappeared beneath the sudden rush of recognition. Her world, or at least what used to be. They could help me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange now. Help her. Do what? Dakota didn't answer right away. He simply watched her, his gaze steady, giving her the space to think, to decide. Just like he always had. They stopped a short distance away, close enough to see the figures moving between the wagons, but far enough to remain unseen. Eliza's heart began to race. This was it. The chance she had been searching for, a way back. Back to familiar faces, familiar ways of living. Back to certainty, to structure, to everything she had once believed she needed. All she had to do was walk forward. Her feet didn't move. Instead, she stood there, caught between two worlds. Behind her was the life she had begun to understand, the quiet, the patience, the connection she had built with someone she never expected to trust. Ahead of her was the life she had left behind. The choice should have been easy. It wasn't. Eliza swallowed, her gaze fixed on the distant wagons. "I should go," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Dakota's response came softly. "If that is your path." No hesitation, no resistance, just acceptance. Eliza turned to look at him. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, not sadness, not exactly, but something quieter, something deeper, understanding. He wasn't trying to convince her to stay. He wasn't asking her to choose him. He was letting her go. If that was what she wanted? The realization struck her harder than anything else. He had always given her a choice. From the very beginning. Eliza looked back toward the wagons. She imagined herself walking forward, calling out, being welcomed in. She imagined explaining where she had been, what had happened. She imagined slipping back into a life that made sense to everyone else. But as she pictured it, something didn't feel right. It felt distant, like a memory she could touch but no longer live inside. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with clarity. She turned back. Dakota hadn't moved. He stood where he was, calm and steady, as though he had already accepted whatever decision she would make. And in that moment, Eliza understood something she hadn't fully seen until now. He wasn't her past. He wasn't something she had stumbled into by accident. He was part of her future, but only if she chose it. The choice was hers, completely. Eliza took a slow breath, her heart steadying. Then she stepped back. Not toward the wagons, but away from them. Dakota's eyes shifted slightly, a quiet recognition passing through them. "I thought I knew where I belonged," Eliza said softly, her voice clearer now. "I thought it was back there." She glanced once more toward the distant figures, then shook her head. "But it isn't," a small silence followed. Then she met his gaze fully. "My place isn't something I left behind," she continued. "It's something I found." The words felt right. More right than anything she had said before. Dakota studied her for a moment, as if making sure this was truly her decision, not influenced, not uncertain. Then slowly he nodded. "Yes," he said, just like before, simple, certain, but this time it felt different. Because now she understood exactly what it meant. Eliza felt something settle inside her, not doubt, not hesitation, but peace. The choice had been made. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but from something deeper, something real. And as she turned fully away from the life she once believed she needed, she realized something that made her chest feel lighter than it had in a long time. She wasn't losing anything. She was choosing everything. The world felt quieter after. That dot, not empty, never empty, but calm in a way Eliza had never known before. The choice she had made didn't weigh on her. It didn't linger with doubt or second thoughts. Instead, it settled gently within her, like something that had always been waiting to be understood. She didn't look back again. The wagons, the life she had once chased, the certainty she thought she needed, they faded into the distance, not with regret, but with quiet acceptance. That part of her story wasn't erased. It had simply led her here. Days passed, though Eliza no longer tried to measure them. Time had lost its urgency. What mattered now wasn't where she needed to be, it was where she already was. With him, Dakota didn't treat her any differently after her decision. There were no grand gestures, no sudden shift in his behavior. He remained steady, grounded, and quietly present, but something between them had changed. It was subtle at first, a glance that lingered a moment longer than before, a shared silence that felt deeper, more connected. The space between them, once cautious and uncertain, had softened into something natural. Something mutual. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in warm shades of gold and amber, Eliza stood at the edge of a gentle rise, watching the horizon. The wind moved softly through her hair, carrying with it the familiar scent of the land she had come to understand. She heard his footsteps behind her, not loud, not sudden. Just enough to let her know he was there. "You stayed," Dakota said. It Wasn't a question, Eliza smiled faintly, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. I did. A quiet pause followed before she turned to face him. I didn't stay because I had nowhere else to go, she continued, her voice calm but certain. I stayed because I chose to. Dakota met her gaze, his expression steady as always, but there was something more there now. Something she recognized. He nodded slowly. I know. The simplicity of his answer made her chest tighten not with uncertainty, but with something warmer. Relief. Understanding. For so long, Eliza had felt like she was being carried by circumstances, pushed from one place to another without control. But here, in this moment, she felt something entirely different. She felt rooted, not because the land held her, but because she had chosen to belong. Dakota stepped closer, though he still left space between them just as he always had. But this time, the distance didn't feel necessary. It felt like an invitation. Eliza, he said quietly. It was the first time he had spoken her name like that, softly, deliberately. She felt it. What? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but as though he was choosing his words carefully. You are not lost, he said. Eliza's breath caught slightly. The words echoed something deep within her, something she hadn't fully realized until now. She shook her head gently, a small smile forming. No, she said. I'm not. Another silence settled between them, but it was no longer filled with things unsaid. It was full, complete in a way that didn't need to be explained. Eliza took a small step forward. This time, she closed the distance. Dakota didn't move away. For a moment, they simply stood there, facing each other as the last light of the sun faded into dusk. The world around them seemed to quiet even further, as though giving space to the moment. I was afraid of you, Eliza admitted softly. Dakota didn't react with surprise. I know, he said. She let out a small breath, her eyes searching his. But you never gave me a reason to be. No, he agreed. Her heart steadied. And still, she continued, you let me leave. Dakota's gaze didn't waver. You needed to choose? The truth of that settled deeply within her. He had never tried to hold her, and because of that, she had come back. Eliza reached out then, her hand hesitating for only a moment before gently finding his. His hand was warm, steady, grounding. Real. This wasn't something taken. This wasn't something forced. This was something chosen. By both of them. Dakota looked down briefly at their hands, then back at her. There was no uncertainty in his expression, now only quiet clarity. You stayed, he said again, softer this time. Eliza nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around his. Double quotes. Yes, she whispered, not because she had to, not because she was lost. But because in the vast open quiet of the world, she had found something she never expected, a place where she was free, a place where she was seen, a place where love wasn't something that held her back, but something that let her choose to stay.